Welcome to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena with Jack Llewellyn. I am Jack Llewellyn. Thanks for joining me. As a reminder, for some of you who might not know, I wrote a book last year called Someone Had to Die, which focuses and is the result of my 30-plus year work on investigation into the case of the kidnapping, torture, interrogation, and murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena in Guadalajara in 1985. In addition to my book, I've got a podcast where we talk about the Camarena case and also discuss current events with respect to Mexican cartels, drug trafficking, and the like. And then there's also a newsletter. So I tend to get a fair amount of questions from friends, family, people on the internet about Mexico, about cartels. And today I want to talk about one question that I get probably more than any other, which is it safe for American tourists to go to Mexico? Now, I want to say two things in advance before we really talk about answering that question. First, I'm a lawyer, I'm a writer, I am not an international security expert, but I do follow this pretty well. I do talk to people who are international security experts. So what I'm going to tell you is my opinion only, but I think there's a pretty good factual basis behind it. Number two, this question kind of reminds me of in law school. So in law school, you find out pretty early that one good answer for almost every question is, it depends. And the answer to the question, is Mexico safe for American tourists? The answer is, it depends, and it depends primarily on two things: where you're going, what you're going to do. Now, when we talk about where we're going, there are certain places in Mexico that clearly are the subject of what I'll call turf wars. And that can be wars, battles, operations between two cartels. It could be the same between elements of the same cartel, or it can be a cartel having active campaigns with or against the Mexican government, the Mexican military, or different police enforcement or law enforcement operations. There's really like 5 or 6 places in Mexico where there are active turf wars going on that warrant consideration. In no particular order, those are Nuevo Laredo, which is right across the border from Laredo, Texas; Tijuana, everybody knows that; Ciudad Juarez, right across the border from El Paso; and then you also have Culiacan, which is the capital of the Mexican state of Sinaloa, the resort town of Acapulco, and then you have Zacatecas and some places in Jalisco. So those are the big turf war areas. Now, if you think about it, Nuevo Laredo and Ciudad Juarez in particular, and Tijuana, all have a lot of movement between the borders on a daily basis. Economically, they rely on each other. There's a lot going on. So, am I saying that Americans should not go to Nuevo Laredo or Tijuana or Ciudad Juarez? Of course not. However, you want to be extremely careful. Okay, so let's talk about Nuevo Laredo and Ciudad Juarez first. If you are Americans going back and forth as part of, again, the economy, the linked economy of those two border towns, then keep doing what you're doing, but be smart about it, right? Don't go out of the ordinary. Don't make yourself a target, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. On the other hand, if you happen to be in Laredo, you happen to be in El Paso, might not be a good idea just to do a joyride as a tourist into Mexico to see what's going on, right? Hey, let's hop in the car, go across the border into Ciudad Juarez and see if we can see some cartel members. Not a good idea. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, let's talk about Tijuana. Same thing. Am I telling American tourists Don't cross the border from San Diego into Tijuana and, have a fun weekend. Of course not. But again, in Tijuana, there are places where tourists tend to be more. There are places that tend to have higher security. There are places that police tend to frequent. Stay in those areas. Stay with groups of people. All of those sorts of things that make sense. Now, there are some places, like we mentioned Culiacan, we mentioned Zacatecas, some places in Jalisco. These might be areas that I just wouldn't go to unless you have a compelling reason to go. And if you do, then we're going to talk in just a second about things to do and not do when you're there. Acapulco came up. I mentioned that earlier. Again, not telling you don't go to a resort, but stay away from the seedier areas. Same thing applies to Mazatlan. Okay? Go have a good time in Mazatlan, stay on the beach. But, if you get the compulsion to go to places where, tourists don't normally go, to get a look at real Mexico, be careful. That's not always going to be the smartest thing to do. Now, we get a lot of questions about Tulum and Cancun. Same thing applies, right? I remember going to Cancun or going to Playa del Carmen when I was a little bit younger, and we would go into Cancun proper. Oftentimes we would go into Walmart and try and get prescriptions more cheaply. I'm not sure I do that as much anymore. There certainly have been incidents in resort areas in both Cancun and Playa del Carmen, Tulum area, but those are going to be far less than if you're off the beaten path. Again, I'm a big believer in stay with tourists, stay where there's other people, stay where there are groups of people. Your chances of having issues are much, much less. All right, let's say you want to go to Mexico. You're going to go to Mexico. You're going to try to stay away from some of the places we've talked about, but you're going to go. What should you do and not do? Number one, don't make yourself a target. Americans stick out like a sore thumb. Look, I'm a gringo, man. I'm white. I go into Guadalajara. I go to a taco stand. Everybody knows I'm not from there. So there's only so much you can do. But don't make yourself a target, right? Be careful with your iPhone. Don't carry a camera around your neck. Leave your Rolex at home. All of those things. Be careful, be smart, be aware. Number two, don't drive outside the cities. My recommendation is just don't drive. But if you have to, or you want to for some crazy reason, be really, really careful about driving outside the cities. There was an American tourists who were killed just outside of Tijuana not too long ago. They just were on a bad place at night. If you're going to travel between cities, long drives, try to do it during the day. Try to do it on the big roads. Try to do it on the toll roads. Just be really, really careful. It's a bad situation to be on a desert highway, in the middle of nowhere, by yourself. Nobody's going to help you if something bad happens. I've talked about driving from Yuma to Caborca and have had retired DEA agents tell me not the best idea. So just be really, really careful. I think driving outside of the cities is very problematic. As we already said, stay in the tourist areas, try to stay around people, try to stay away from seedier areas. And then the last thing is be aware. So I spoke at the International Summit on Mexican Cartels and Gangs recently. It was in San Antonio. Several hundred law enforcement officials there. And Robert Almonte, who ran the program, was speaking about Mexican cartels and about this very issue, about going to Mexico. And what he said is the biggest problem for tourists in Mexico isn't being targets, it's being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So if you're on the beach when they have the gunfight on Skidoos in Cancun, or if you're the unfortunate tourists who were, having lunch, having a beer in Tulum and are innocent bystanders, there's not much you can do about that. The one thing to keep in mind is if there's a battle between cartel members or cartel members and the police, the cartel folks don't care about collateral damage. Don't care at all. That's your greatest risk. So, go to Cancun, go to Cabo, go to Tulum, go to Playa del Carmen, go to Mazatlan, go to Puerto Vallarta, but be careful, be thoughtful, be aware. And on the other hand, don't assume everybody's a cartel member, right? Lots of great places to go in Mexico, lots of great people, great food, great alcohol, fun times for a lot of people. So go, but think about where you're going. So is Mexico safe for American tourists? Yes, but it depends on where you go and what you do. You want to get more information on Mexican cartels? Check out my podcast. Check out my newsletter. Thank you. Have a great day.